Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is a podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I have a very special guest with me today, speaker and author of Nightmare Success and host of the podcast Nightmare Success In and Out, Brent Cassity. Join me today. And Brent spent time in Leavenworth Prison, and he will share so much of that journey and the lessons that he learned that really are so specific to leaders today. He shared so much more how he thrived and survived in that environment and what his life is like now and the great things that he's doing since he has been out. You don't want to miss a second of this. Let's get at it. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is a podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. And I have got some inspiration for you today, and a lot of lessons are going to be taken out. So leaders, stop what you're doing. Make sure you're listening to this. So let me introduce my special guest, speaker and author of Nightmare Success and host of the podcast Nightmare Success In and Out, Brent Cassity has joined me today. Brent, how you doing there, sir?
Kenny, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to start here. I want to give you plenty of time and space to really tell your backstory. And as I was telling you before we came on air, I have gotten goosebumps from the inspiration of your story, and it is such a story of perseverance and leadership. I don't want to ruin it by saying another word, so I want you to just go ahead and tell your backstory, and then we can get into a few other things, especially the book.
Sure. So Kenny, I grew up as a kid that was like a real normal childhood. I thought, it was the childhood where the kids play in the neighborhood. You get picked for the teams, you play the touch football and basketball, and you ride your bikes until the sun goes down, everybody goes in to eat. That was my life.
Wow.
Except my dad went to prison.
Oh.
So it was, and when I say that, it wasn't like we were living in some weird environment and dad was a drug dealing guy or anything like that. My dad was, and everybody, has their parents and how those parents play into your life. But, I look back and I know that I wouldn't be the person I am today without, the mom and dad that I had. But my dad was unique. He came from a small town, probably like 3,000 or 4,000 people. He was really good at sports. He won the state championship in this little town he was in. He was valedictorian. He went to college on a D1 basketball scholarship, zoomed out of there, graduated #1 in his law class, and won some big cases when he was young, and then he got into business. And, for me as a kid, 13, 14 years old, I was like, man, I want to be that guy. That's what I want to be.
Yes.
And so one night, in my perfect world, my dad comes to my brother and I, and he says, boys, he said, I need to talk to you. So we went into the family room and he says, I've really gotten myself into a heap of trouble with the bank I own. And he said, I think, I told them to go run the government and I'd run the bank, and it's gone from bad to worse since then. And to get this all behind us, I'm gonna plead in this federal case. And I'm seeing his mouth move, but it's like, I'm not hearing it. It's like, how in the world is this guy that has a golden touch, my idol, is telling me that he's going to plead guilty to something and possibly go to prison? And about the time that his words start coming back out, and we're going to move to St. Louis.
Wow.
I was like,
Wow.
Good Lord, Kitty, this was like the worst.
Yeah.
This was like the worst family meeting you could have in my world.
Wow.
But we moved, and when we got to St. Louis, it was kind of strange because Dad did go to prison. We moved into a new neighborhood, and back then there wasn't Google, so it wasn't like they could figure out, who are the Cassidys. So the thing was, we're moving in, the neighbors are being nice, they're bringing stuff over. But the question is, like, she's not widowed, she's not divorced. Where's the dad?
Mm.
And we decided that we were just going to say, Dad's out of town working. And it kind of worked because he was about 2.5 hours down the road at Marion Prison, and he was working. He had a kitchen job, but he was in prison. But it was a weird thing to have as a kid that was 15 years old. And I remember really nobody knew about this when we moved in to this new town, and we would go and visit. And I remember a couple of things when we went down to visit. One was, I can't believe we're this family. We went from, a family that was pretty well to do and things were going great. And now we're this family that goes to visit my dad in prison on the weekends.
Mm.
But the other thing I remember is that when my dad came out, having somebody you love come around that corner in prison to a visiting room is scary. You like, did they turn into a prison creature? Is it still my dad? Is he okay?
Yes.
And for the most part, Kenny, he was.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember leaving that room and thinking, this will never happen to me. I will never have this happen to me. At 15 years old, I said, whatever I do in my life, this will never happen to me. And at 47 years old, my dad, me, and 4 other people ended up pleading guilty on a plea bargain to go to federal prison. And it, how that all happened and what happened, it's just amazing that I could be staring at the gates of Leavenworth at 47 years old saying, this will never happen to me.
Wow. Wow. What an amazing story. And from what my take is, it's just the beginning kind of your journey, because, well, I'll let you tell it. What happens? What's that like? Let me go back to staring at the gates of Leavenworth first. What was that like?
It was scary. There's no, I don't know if you can make an analogy to it, because in that world, I'll back up a little bit, because we went through a 6-year investigation. So that's something I would never wish on anybody, but it was, getting up in the morning, fighting, going to bed, thinking how we get a win, getting up again, and going through 6 years of that. I think I hit my rock bottom moment before I ever stood at those gates of Leavenworth, because it finally came to me that it wasn't going to happen. We weren't going to win this. And when they came to us with a plea, my daughters were in high school, and we sat down as a family, and they said, Dad, there's just no way. This has been a tsunami of bad. You can't go to trial. And the one thing that I couldn't go to trial on is that in 1994, they passed a law that you can't allow an ex-felon to work in the business of insurance. So we had a marketing company, and we had an insurance company, and my dad did work in the business of insurance. And the way that everything had transpired, when my dad came out of prison, the one thing that survived out of all of his businesses was the company that was called National Prearranged Services. And it wasn't a sexy company. It took care of your funeral arrangements before you die. To take the burden off the family. You freeze the price, you pick out all your services, and it's all taken care of. That company continued to grow, and then it grew into the way we funded those contracts was with insurance. Insurance wasn't something that I was interested in. I was interested in the sales and marketing aspect of our company. And at a very young age, I got into that company, went down to the state of Texas. Our home state was Missouri. We were in another state of Illinois. And I went down there and built a big region. And my dad was more than happy to turn the keys over to this 20-something kid and say, hey, you got this. And I was more than happy to do that, because it was a family business. Dad was more, he liked the markets, he liked the insurance company, and I really liked the sales and marketing. So as far as how we grew, we went from 3 states to 25 states, and we were really rolling. We then created a more, I guess, sexy company with a company that was Forever Enterprises. And that company, Kenny, was the idea of recording people's lives and their life stories before they die, and then we then put a touchscreen console on those cemeteries so a granddaughter could meet the great grandmother or the grandmother that they hadn't had a chance to meet through this technology.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That became something that got a lot of press. We got on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and Fortune, and Time, and we bought Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and that became a cover story of Entertainment Tonight. HBO decided to do a documentary on us called The Young and the Dead that spawned the series 6 Feet Under. So we were really things when I was about 40 years old, I felt very accomplished, very accomplished. But when our tsunami hit was through our insurance company, and it got dark. We went from a simple arbitration that was a reinsurance to not to get into the weeds, but if you have an insurance company, if you have a reinsurance company, it just means they take the liability and pay you commission to the smaller company, which was us.
Okay.
They came back to us, said, "Hey, we'd like to renegotiate that reinsurance agreement." And my dad, being who he was a legal mind, and he said, "Well, hell no, it's not in the contract." So we went to arbitration, and that arbitration was a disaster. We went from discovery from $2 million to $4 million to $8 million to $12 million, and it started to hit our capital surplus. Being in 25 states, insurance regulators don't like that, and we got a lot of questions that started happening. That ended up me getting into the mix of that by my dad coming to me and saying, "Hey, Brent, I can't go talk to these regulators. I'm an ex-felon, but I think you would be a good voice." And Kenny, it was one of those things where I was like, man, that was the company I wasn't paying any attention to. That's the company I should have been, looking at. And it was my arrogance to think that I could own something and not really pay attention to it. But I wanted to go in and save the day. We had 400 or 500 people that worked with us, and I thought I could go in and save the day. And I went around, I flew all over the place, and at the end of the time period, I wasn't able to save the day. I went to receivership. It started a criminal investigation, and off we went. Going back into my rock bottom moment, the day before I had agreed that I was going to do my plea deal, my family was up at our vacation home, and I was going to go plea and then go and see them the next day. It was around the 4th of July. We had a family call, and I remember, my dad was saying, we're going to do this and that, and my brother and mom were talking about how they'd help take care of my wife and the girls, and one of those calls you never want to have. But when I got off the phone, it was one of those things, Kenny, that I had never dealt with the fact that, what am I going to do now? I'm going to plead tomorrow. I've been fighting for 6 years, and I'd never even considered, what am I going to do as a felon going to prison and then living as an ex-felon? What does that mean for me? What do I even want to live as an ex-felon? And by myself, I was drinking, which is not a good combination, being by yourself and going and pleading the next day, and had another drink, and I really started to feel sorry for myself. Really started feeling like a victim. And I thought, well, does Julie, my wife, does she even deserve to be stained with this? My girls going forward, is their dad being an ex-felon? Does anybody want me around? And I got out a piece of paper, and I started writing about, Julie, what a warrior she'd been as a wife, and my kids, here's your fatherly advice, and all the all the friends who'd been great support. And I really wrote this. It was disturbing to think about now. And I grabbed the keys to the car, and I went downstairs, and I didn't know if I was going to go run into a tree or just let the car run. Something hit me like a lightning bolt. And it was like, my God, Brent, what are you doing? This would be the worst way to ever go out. This would be the acquitter to your wife and kids, and you're the glass half full guy. You're the solution guy. What are you doing? And from that moment forward, I told myself, and it really became so crystal clear to me, the difference between a victim and a survivor. A victim takes away all your strength. You blame people. You curl up in a fetal position. just saying the word survivor
Mm-hmm.
makes you feel different, makes you sit up straighter. And I said to myself, no matter what happens to me from this, and there was a lot of scary things that were getting ready to happen to me. I was going to go plea. I didn't know what I was getting sentenced to. I was going to go to prison. But I told myself, no matter what happens, I'm going to make my family and the people around me proud of how I handled the situation. So when I was standing at that gate at Leavenworth, knowing that I was going for a 5-year sentence, everything I loved, everything I knew was behind me, and everything in front of me was the great unknown. And from what I'd seen on TV, I thought, I could die, I could get raped, I could whatever, all those things that go through your mind but I have one thing for everybody to think about. Nothing is ever as bad as your mind makes it out to be,
Mm-hmm.
not even prison.
Wow.
And for people thinking about leadership and stepping out of your comfort zone into the uncomfortable zone, your fears of things that make you nervous, it's not ever as bad as your mind makes it. Just take a step into it. Think, okay, I've done the step. Take another step, and you're like, okay, I'm in. And by the third step, you're like, I've got this. The biggest thing is to step out of, and that's why I use the nightmare success. Nightmare success, I got that from walking the fence at Leavenworth, thinking, what am I was thinking, Kenny, it doesn't get any worse than this.
Mm-hmm.
This is as bad as it gets. I've lived this life. I thought I accomplished all these things, and here I am walking the fence of Leavenworth.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do now? What's my next move? And at that time, I thought, what I'm going to do? I'm going to take what this journey has been, and I'm going to try to help people get unstuck. I'm going to try to show them that there are steps you can take to take yourself out of this. But what is that called? And the more I walked, the miles I walked, I feel like I walked from Leavenworth to California and back as many miles as I walked. But nightmare success came to me because everything that you want in life, you've got to walk through your fears. You've got to walk over it, under it, around it to get to where you want to free yourself to wherever you want to be. And I think that there's so many people that sit and think about on the sidelines, man, I'd like to get into the game. I'd love to get into the game. And the one thing you don't want to have happen is to be that 85-year-old rocking on the front porch with your rocking chair thinking, man, I should have gotten in the game.
Mm.
I had it. I could have been that, but I watched from the sidelines. There were 5 things that I used, Kenny, that steadied me when I walked through those gates.
Mm-hmm.
Tools that I used. The first one was when you walk into an environment, it's an unknown world. Look around a lot, don't say a lot. Humble yourself. It's very easy to humble yourself in prison because you've been prisonized and you become a number. But even when you walk into a new environment with a job, you're starting and you're wondering, how do I get to the next step? Humble yourself. Look around. See who's getting it right. Like in prison, if somebody, had a prison job that I would like to have, or they were reading books that I'd like to read, or if they had a prison workout routine that they were doing that I'd like to do, I was looking at that, and then I would go up and talk to them. You're doing your time the way I'd like to do my time. How are you doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's like getting the answers to the test before the test. And if you humble yourself, I did this when I was a 20-something executive. I would go out, I read all the time, everything I could read. But if I read something, I would call them up and say, hey, I was reading this article about you. And it always shocked me how the people who were getting it right would want to share that with somebody because they were proud of the fact of how they were doing it, how their system worked, or how they got to the next step. So for me, it was important to get into that society and humble yourself. The second thing, and if anybody has seen that movie, Shawshank Redemption,
Yes.
it's got so many life lessons in it. But the biggest one, I think, is Andy Dufresne was wrongly accused of killing his wife, murdering his wife. He had was sentenced to life in prison, and his Zewantaneo was this whitest of the white sands, the bluest of the blue waters. He was going to fix up the old fishing boat and take his friends out, and then they were going to have the little inn on the beach where they'd sit and watch the sun go down.
Yeah.
But when you heard Andy talk about that, you could feel it. You saw it in his eyes. Mm-hmm. That Zewantaneo kept him tipping through his cell wall for 19 years. And then every day he would let the daily victory out with the holes in his pockets to let that wall out. I always tell people, you got to have your Zewantaneo. What is that? What is that thing that makes you feel like Andy felt? Because that's the thing that will get you walking into your fear. That is the reason why you would walk into your fear, because you have this feeling, I got to get to that other side. Why do I want to get to that other side? My Zewantaneo's over there. Mm-hmm. So important to have when you're going through life, or you're trying to build a business, or you're trying to make yourself better than. The third thing is that win the day, one day at a time. Life's not fair. Make a difference regardless. Mm-hmm. And this was big for me because people say, well, how could you win the day in prison? You can. I mean, maybe I got forklift certified at the food warehouse that day, or I had a great phone call with my daughters on the phone. Whatever that is, take your win.
Yeah.
And my daughter made a calendar every year, and I would write in those, and it had the family pictures on the calendar, and I'd write in it every night, my win for the day. If I had a bad day in prison, and you have a bad day in prison, you have a bad day out in the real world, go all the way down with your bad. Feel it to your soul. This is a bad day.
Yeah, I love that.
But my hack is don't fill in 2 boxes of bad.
Yeah.
If it was bad, I filled it in bad, but I knew that I had to find a win the next day, because I knew that if I didn't, 2 boxes of bad could turn into a week, could turn into a month, turn into a year. And then what happens? You get institutionalized where you can't break free. Mm-hmm. One of the great lines in Shawshank is that Morgan Freeman tells Andy when he comes in and they're looking at the wall, he said, when you first get in here, you look at these walls and you perceive they're here to keep you in. And he said, as you become a part of this world, he said, those walls are the arms give you comfort. Mm-hmm. That's when you know you're in a bad, ugly routine.
Yeah.
You look at the walls of your own prison, of your own mind, and even though it's a routine you don't like, a routine you hate, you know you should be stepping into a better situation, you don't. Mm-hmm. Because it's that routine that gives you comfort, and that comfort becomes a warden of your freedom. You can't get to the point where the walls are your comfort. You've got to get to the point where you've got to be able to break through the walls, and the only way you do that is have a reason why you would break through the walls.
Love it. Absolutely.
The fourth one for me was learn from your mistakes. They don't define you, but they will make you wiser. Mm-hmm. All the greatest people that you read about, Kenny, all the books that you've got behind you, those are people that all made mistakes. Mm-hmm. What did they do with their mistakes? They learned from it, and they evolved and became better from it. So many people today are worried about making mistakes, whether it's because of social media or they're seeing, on Instagram that they're at their best vacation and their best party, their best restaurant dinner. But here's the thing, that's not real. Yeah. What's real is that you have to step through mistakes, and then you learn from the mistakes. The only thing you don't want to do with mistakes is make the same mistake twice.
Yeah.
That's a killer.
Yeah.
And the fifth one for me was in prison was don't give in, don't give up, keep being yourself regardless of the circumstances. Otherwise, you will lose what makes you you. That was probably my biggest fear, because I was worried when I went into prison, I would become prison Brent, and I would lose Brent. And the best way to not do that is to keep being yourself regardless of the circumstances. For me, I did a lot of things in prison that I did out of prison to keep I got a good prison job. I got on a good routine to work out. I read a book a week. So I kept connected to the outside world,
Mm-hmm.
and it made me continue to feel like me. When you fall into being institutionalized is when you become too much of the environment. And I saw this a lot where guys that get close to getting out, and they put hands on a guard or something to catch another charge,
Mm-hmm.
so that they could stay in prison longer, because prison became more familiar to them than freedom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we see that all the time on the outside.
Yeah.
People will sabotage their opportunities because they're more comfortable with the job they don't like, or the job that has become their comfort, to maybe that great experiment of brilliance that they have in them, and they won't do it because they've institutionalized themselves.
Wow. Wow. So powerful. And you're reminding me of the Morgan Freeman character also, right, in Shawshank, how he couldn't handle, being on the outside. And
Right.
it's because of the things he did. You were so wonderfully transparent. What an amazing, amazing story. Then I've only got a couple more questions for you, because you really have laid it out for us. And I got to tell you, the mark of a great storyteller, which is you, is that I'm right there with you. I felt like, walking, and I'm looking at the walls. I'm walking all these miles. I'm looking at the walls of Leavenworth. I can't imagine what that was like at first for your family, but how you got through it was just so fantastic. I want to ask this because I love what you do now on your podcast. Or was there anyone that specifically stood out for you when you got in, that was an inspiration to you on the inside?
For sure. My first bunkmate was a Hispanic guy that I would have probably never met. Uh, he was he had worked his points down to get into the minimum, but he was a gang leader, and he immediately, when I walked, that very first moment that I met him, he said, "Boy, Cassity," he said, "you don't look like you've ever been here before." He said, "You're going to need a lot of help." But you know what, Kenny? He helped me out tremendously. He immediately, he said, "You can't put anything in that locker. It's filthy." He got out all the cleaning stuff and helped me start getting things cleaned up. He said, the warden comes through here every Friday. Your bed has to be made military style. Let's get this going. I'm going to show you how to do it. And then he immediately connected me to some people that he thought that could help me get connected with prison jobs and get really educated into the system. But really, Romo and Jim Clark were two people that I met that very first day that stayed with me throughout, that were my guides basically through a world of the unknown. And I guess the thing that surprised me the most, Kenny, was that I thought I was going into a death march. I thought I could die. And what I found is there were some really good people in prison,
Mm-hmm.
and people who, and I'm not saying there's bad apples everywhere, but there were some people in there that really wanted to help you, really wanted to get you into living in that world. And it was a surprise to me because I didn't see that. But I'll tell you something that's happened to me since is that I never judge a book by its cover. I always want to hear the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what led me into the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, is that it's all about, what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, and set yourself free? And I interview people who have been to prison, and we talk about, their strategies, their story of growing up, while they were in prison, how they re-entered the world. But those strategies, what I found is a lot of people who listen to this, it's not a prison podcast, it's an inspiration, hope, and change podcast.
Yes.
And those strategies can be used
anywhere. Yeah.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's, to me, I love being in a position to hear these stories. It inspires me to continue to do what I'm doing when I hear their stories. And I think the one that's almost blown my mind the most is there was a guy that spent 3 years at Leavenworth Prison, came out, and he is now the current mayor of Leavenworth, Kansas.
What? I didn't see that one. I'm gonna have to listen to that one. Wow. That is
Jermaine
crazy.
Wilson.
That
Yeah, just
that's crazy.
it's and his story's been, he's been on the CBS Morning Show and and he well should be, because his
Yeah.
story is just a true inspiration, a transformation of what you can do with your life if you really dedicate yourself
Yeah.
to making that change.
Oh, no doubt. Brent, I think, and I'll just make a little bit of a statement, but I do want you to comment here, and you kind of answered it already. The I've known some folks that have gone to prison, and they when they got out, they wanted to get as far away as possible. Didn't want to have anything to do with anyone that was there before, or anything like that. You chose the opposite, but now you're the inspiration through your podcast. So again, podcast is Nightmare Success in and out. Please, please, please take a listen. You listen to one, you're gonna be hooked, because they aren't. I think I was expecting these are prison stories, right?
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that. And thank God that you took that leap, you took that step to say, you know what, I'm going to take this experience and now I'm going to really help inspire others. I think that's just amazing. And thank you for doing that, because I'm sure it's inspiring so many other lives. I have one other last question for you, and that is paint a little bit of a picture of what it was like, let's say, those first couple of days out.
It's Kenny, it's difficult to explain, because a lot of people, and I felt this coming out, is there's nothing better than walking out of prison, walking into your family's arms. Take a 5-year-old coming down the stairs for Christmas and seeing all the presents, and times that by a million is how that feels.
Wow.
But immediately it's like jumping in a moving car. Your mind starts spinning, okay, I'm jumping back into this world. Okay, my wife's paying the bills now. I want to get back in. I want people to see me as being a help, and my kids and everybody, that I haven't changed. And what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? And so people are looking at you as, oh my God, you got to be so excited. Yes, you are. And the idea of that not being that is not ever true. What's tough is to reintegrate, because no matter what, and I had a lot of support. My wife came to see me every weekend, and I was one of the lucky prisoners. I was with 435 guys, and I was one of the very lucky prisoners that got a lot of support, and I got a lot of support coming out. What I see that's so tough, though, is a lot of people don't. And I always say that the ex-felon is the last of its breed that can be legally discriminated against.
Mm.
Housing, you check the box, we won't rent to you. For a job, check the box, we won't give you the job. And for those guys that can't get, I was lucky. I had support from people who helped me get a job.
Mm-hmm.
For those guys that can't, it's so easy to see how that circle goes back and cycles back into prison.
Mm-hmm.
They're terrible numbers. It's 2/3 in 3 years and 3/4 in 5 years. And it's a lot to do with the fact they can't desperately wanting to find their way into a new world, but they can't, because they can't get the steps that they need to take to get into it. Now, the guys that don't give up, they can still make it happen, but
Mm-hmm.
boy, it's tough reentry. My reentry was one of the things that you do, and you don't even realize it, is you wear these shower shoes in prison. Nobody goes into the shower without these shower shoes on, ever. And I remember when I came back and I had gotten out of the halfway house and I was back at home, I was going into the shower and I went in with my shower shoes on, and Julie looked at me and she said, "Brent, what are you doing?" And I looked and I said, "I don't know. I don't know. I don't know."
Wow. And that's amazing how you almost had to slow the world down a little bit. That your mind is spinning, but you're like, wait a second, let me slow this down a bit. I fibbed. I have one last question, and that is, how can people get in touch with you, Brent? And I'm gonna say the book one more time, and I'll make sure I post that too. But aside from what I'll probably say, what I'll post, how else can people get in touch with you?
The easiest thing, and I love to go back and forth with people on BrentCassity.com,
Okay.
my website. And for those, I spell Cassity wrong. It's Cassity. I would have loved to have been Sean and David Cassidy when I was growing up with part of their family, but we just spell it wrong. And I'm on all the Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn as Brent Cassity.
Okay.
And you can get my book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Awesome. Nightmare Success is the name of the book, and the podcast is Nightmare Success In and Out. Folks, a high recommendation from me for both. And the podcast is such a great listen. The book is a great read. Go out and get both. Brent, you are, I know you probably don't like to hear this, but I'll say it anyway. You are a hero in my eyes. I knew talking to you because you're serving the underserved. You really are. And those statistics that you just gave, I had no idea it was that bad, especially here in 2023. And so I think that your story has already inspired so many and will continue to inspire. And your mindset and leaders, this is all leadership stuff. And so if you listen to his podcast, you will see leadership throughout, right from the beginning. And the people that you've talked to. Now I got to find that one about the mayor. So I'll check that one out.
Kenny, I got one thing I want to share
Please.
for the leaders
Absolutely.
out there. And it's an old prison story. It was Damon West was in prison. He was a quarterback down in Texas. He got into drugs. He was having a really hard time in prison. He was getting put in solitary confinement. And an old inmate came up to him and he said, Damon, you're not going to make it if you keep doing your time like this. He said, you got to figure this is like a boiling pot of water in here, this prison yard. He said, are you following me? He said, I'm listening. He said, now, if I put a carrot in that boiling pot of water, what's that water do to the carrot? And he said, well, it makes it soft. He said, you can't get soft in here because you'll get hurt. You could lose yourself. He said, now, if I put an egg in that boiling pot of water, he said, what's that water do to the egg? He said, well, it makes the egg hard. He said, you can't get hard in here. You got to keep your empathy. You got to still have heart. He said, I put a coffee bean in the water. He said, what's that coffee bean do to the water? He said, I don't know. He said, I'm not following. He said, that coffee bean changes the water. He said, you got to be the change. And if you always think of that and use that analogy when you're wanting to look at leadership, always be the change, have a plan, have something that people will follow, inspire them by the change, and you'll be able to build a lot.
Man, that is a great analogy. I love that. I never heard that one before. That is fantastic. Fantastic. Brent, this has been wonderful. I'm hoping to talk to you again, and because I'd love to even learn more about your journey. I'm going to leave it there, and thank you again so much for taking the time to come on with us today. And I can't wait to share this out to as many people that I know need to hear your message. So God bless you, and thank you so much.
Kenny, I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I'm going to leave it there. This has been the Leading from the Middle podcast with Kenny and with Brent. We'll talk to you real soon.